in the future. How we did this is that we used the methodology of an ethnographic case study, actually a relational ethnography. So we had the case of this research center, the IBC, where the technology, that is the procedure, was being implemented over the 5 years. And most of our research data is in field work as observations, interviews, and field talks. And inside and outside of this main locale, we have conducted about 1,400 hours of observations, collected hundreds of pages of ethnographic interviews also during this time, not only at the site, but also at specialist conferences, team meetings, and with other external stakeholders. And so we would follow the information that we gained at the main site and trace them to the external actors and locations which they were naming, where we could then further look and inquire about the observed issues and study over time their negotiations, settlements, and consequences between the many stakeholders that are involved also outside of the locale. So, for example, we had in-field talks with the company representatives of the companies that produce TAVI when they would come to visit the site. But we also had separate interviews with them and meetings where they shared the market information with us, described their histories with TAVI, their strategies, the products, the relationships with the different hospitals over time, and so on. And so also tracing these relations, we went to 9 other hospitals in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. We interviewed their TAVI teams, about 30 external formal interviews and 30 internal ones. And the practitioners would include department leaders, interventional cardiologists, cardiac surgeons, nurses, anesthesiologists, and so on. So there was about 16 different types of professionals who were included in the research. And we also studied documents which were relevant to the procedures, procedure protocols, videos, medical articles, written instructions, contracts, clinical research, statistical information, media reports, presentations, and any other material about TAVI that we could find during the 5 years, also studying how they would change and the new findings and things that were being talked about that were the most relevant to the many different stakeholders. And we compared this to what was happening in the practice at the locale as we were doing the ethnographic in-field study. We were looking for these themes and topics and the relationships between stakeholders as they developed, and particularly how they were negotiated and settled over time. So during the length of the project at the main case hospital, the project started in 2009 as experimental, meaning it was only performed on patients which were inoperable or untreatable by any other means. So this was a very small number of patients, about 10 to 15 a year. And by the end of our project, it had become a standard procedure with about 200 patients a year. And now in 2024, there's about 600 patients treated a year. There's special operation room and team only reserved for TAVIs. And the IVC is actually a center of excellence for TAVI and is soon about to become the biggest center in Europe for performing TAVIs and a training center for it as well. So it did become a sustainable and successful procedure worldwide as well. And what we observed during its implementation in practice is actually common in many other hospital centers as well, that while at the beginning the TAVI teams included both cardiologists and cardiac surgeons, these were big teams of 12 people, and these practitioners had to learn from each other through collaborations, and now they are experts divided into 2 teams by different types of TAVI procedures. One is led by cardiologists and the other by surgeons. And this process is what the article is about, focusing on the first couple of years of TAVI adoption, which were the most contentious, when the team was still getting on its feet and the doctors who were not used to collaborating before now had to work together and learn from each other. They had together to develop the steps of the procedure and, of course, following procedure protocols and best practices, external elements, but they also had issues. One of the main being which discipline the procedure will belong to in the future. Will it be a cardiological or a surgical procedure? And over time, through different means and situations, we could call it negotiations, but this was done through more than just words. They arrived at satisfactory resolutions, which we in the paper describe as configurations which would work and become sustainable for the future. And at first, what they did was they had an equal 50-50 distribution of the two main types of procedures between the cardiologists and the cardiac surgeons. This was in the period that we are talking about in the paper. And we find that this specialization increased the speed of learning because they had an equal number of procedures that they could train on. It stimulated better and more efficient organization of procedures, so that the TAVI procedure numbers increased exponentially and leading finally to its success today. In the paper, we theorize this with reference to Olson and Glaser, that smaller and homogeneous groups have some key advantages over larger ones, particularly to facilitate effective coordination, which is key in new practice development. In that larger groups, especially if they are heterogeneous, as these multidisciplinary TAVI teams are, require a greater degree of coordination, which makes it more costly and less likely to achieve effective coordination. And this is for three reasons. That first, smaller groups have smaller organizational costs. That is, the larger a group is, the more effort needs to be invested in achieving agreement and sustainable progress. Secondly, smaller groups are better able to utilize the benefits of social incentives because of the existence of closer personal relationships. So that members are incentivized to contribute to the achievement of the shared group goals. And third, smaller groups also tend to be more homogeneous, and then because of this, they're more likely to have shared values and interests and goals, which is also visible, for example, in the case of cardiac surgeons and cardiologists in TAVI, who have shared practices, ways of working, shared histories, and so on, within their disciplinary boundaries, and this enhances cooperation and group cohesion. So groups which are more homogeneous have shared understandings and can achieve effective coordination much easier. And so as a result, the TAVI innovation continued, grew, and achieved sustained use in the future. And it was through the relational perspective or lens that we could see their dynamic interactions and their settlements into the specific configurations which later occurred. So our conclusion was that a way to study the sustainability of medical innovations, maybe other types of innovations as well, is to look at the implementation phases and specifically to consider the organizational setting as relational configurations between different stakeholders, both people and materials and things and procedural protocols, symbols, clinical research, and so on, because at first you can see the relational configurations which was established earlier and that's supported through experience, for example, the disciplinary boundaries. And then you can see the new collaborations and the negotiations of control as the development of new relational configurations, in this case a split of the procedure into two types. Is what we've observed, and on this case that sometimes it may be more beneficial to the sustainability of innovations in healthcare to push for the creation of smaller teams, better than maybe sometimes larger groups, in order to make the innovations in healthcare sustainable. Thank you for your attention, and we're open to questions and comments.